Evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the City of Hermantown Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for January 18th, 2023. It's currently 7:02 in the evening. I'll start with a roll call of members. Myself, Corey Colquist, here. Valerie Roulette, Samuel Clark,
Here.
Beth Wensloff,
Here.
Buckley's not here, Dante Tomasoni,
Here.
and Counselor Geisler is not here. Second up is the approval of this evening's agenda. Can I get a motion, please?
I move to approve tonight's agenda.
Thank you for that. Can I get a second? Appreciate it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Number 3 this evening is the approval of the minutes from the December 20th, 2022 regular meeting. Can I get a motion, please?
Tomasoni move.
Thank you for that. Can I get a second?
Colquist with the second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Number 4 this evening is public discussion. Not seeing anybody in the audience. We'll move on past this one. Number 5 is public hearings. We're here for 5A, zoning ordinance text amendments by the City of Hermantown, amending Chapter 14, signs and ground signs. Eric, what do you have for us this evening?
Great, thank you very much. The city's sign ordinance has been in existence since 1976, when the city first became incorporated. There was an update that was done in 2008, but since then there has been no changes to the sign ordinance. I started here in 2016, and one of the first conversations I had is with Jim Rich, our former building official, who pulled out about 4 pages of handwritten notes and said, "These are all my changes that we need to do for the sign ordinance someday." Well, Jim has since retired, and our new building official, Adam Sherminski, was basically presented with this. And so at that point, we said, well, let's take a run at it. And so what staff did was we worked with Gunnar Johnson, our city attorney, on a couple different things. The first was a general cleanup of the ordinance, just to come in alignment with how laws have changed in the last 40 plus years. Specifically, a lot of things are almost free speech basis that way. So Gunnar has looked at the ordinance to make sure that at least we're in compliance with those type of state and federal laws that way. He also then took Jim Rich's comments through the years and provided red lines that are in front of you here today. Then what we did was, particularly myself and a little bit with Adam and his work with the city of Hermantown, excuse me, with Duluth, started saying, well, these are things that we've encountered in the last number of years as far as they're regarding signs, and tried to address those as best we can. The overall goal was to at least still have the ability to interpret the sign ordinance as best as staff could, and not write it so tightly where we actually get down to creating geometries to measure signs that way, as other communities have done in the past. So particularly things that staff has at least seen through the last number of years is how do you handle multi-tenant buildings? How do you handle multi-tenant buildings that have frontage on more than one side? And other thing that we've been seeing is people are starting to request what we term as monument signs. In the past, only thing we define is a pylon sign that a monument sign could be construed as, but in that case, the height was upwards of 25, 30 feet for a pylon sign, and you don't want a monument sign that tall, something of the monolith. So what this ordinance proposes is actually a definition of a monument sign. You see a number of these throughout town. I've gone through, measured a number of these and tried to come up with, basically something that still meets the spirit of what's out there. So in the case of the ordinance, it allows for the exchange of one pylon sign for a monument sign. So we do cap the height of a monument sign at 14 feet. And we do have a maximum square footage of 140 square feet. And once again, that's not inclusive of the base that way. It's mostly just the sign, actually sign panel associated with it. So once again, it gives staff some flexibility on the interpretation of where the square footage basically happens that way. And a lot of it, as I had said before, was just cleaning up the ordinance. We had a number of references in there to specific fees. What we've done in other ordinances is we just reference the fee schedule, because generally each year fees tend to go up. And so rather than having to rewrite the ordinance every year, we just say reference the fee schedule. It's an easier thing to change that way. And then there are some things, is a lot of the work has happened within what we call the Class C type of signage, is that's what you traditionally see in the commercial type of zoning or retail that way. Right now it allows up to, it's 2 square feet for every 1 lineal foot of building length along the primary road frontage. And that's the way it still reads. We did not get into the multiple sides at this point with the ordinance. We did up some of the square footage allowances associated with it, but we didn't get to the point where we regulated individual signs on each tenant bay, that we're still keeping in language that pertains to master sign plans as best as the developer can propose at the time of initial permit. So in a nutshell, those were a number of the changes that have been done. Like I said, a lot of this was cleanup language through the years. That's why you look at this document and there's quite a bit of red in there from the red lines, but most of that was our attorneys looking at that and bringing this code into a modern compliance. So at that point, I'd welcome any sort of discussion and questions on this. I'll do my best to try to answer those. As this ordinance, if there's still some questions that need to be answered or input from the city attorney, we do have the ability to bring this back at the next meeting to discuss it further as well. So at that point, I'd like to turn it back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Commission members, anybody have any questions or comments for Eric before I get started?
I mean, how can we make input? There's quite a few things in here that
It's pretty substantial. Exactly. And that's why it's the same thing that, we'll try to answer what questions you may have tonight.
Okay.
You may need more time to review this. And like I said, this is not an overly pressing document. I mean, obviously it's something,
important.
but it's an important document still nonetheless. So if the board feels that they want some more time to digest it, it's perfectly within their ability to do that.
Thank you. I think I'll start off with a couple of questions. For years, the ordinance was basically 2 square feet for every lineal foot of the front of a building. Correct? That's what we've been up against for the 17 years I've been doing this.
That's correct. Yes.
How are you going to take into account buildings that face multiple streets?
At this point, the way the ordinance is written, we're still adhering to that longest frontage for the measurement. So for instance, let's say your building's 100 by 60 feet and the 100 is the longest. You would get the 200 square feet. Now, like I said, we entertained at least some thoughts from a staff that, because what we see happening is the last person coming into a development is lucky to get any square footage left. So how we've handled that in the past is trying to have a master sign plan, but that's difficult for developers to do because certain tenants have certain requirements that way. One thing that at least was discussed at a staff point, but was not pursued was, is there a guaranteed minimum for each bay, for lack of better words? That, let's say on a 100-foot building, and I might look to the developers and people have some multiple tenant buildings, but I'm figuring each bay is maybe 25 feet wide. So do you say that each individual bay, for lack of better words, you get a minimum of 25 square feet or 50 square feet, something like that? Some way that at least a person coming in, the last one in a multi-tenant development, knows that at least they can have X number of square feet. Because what's happened in the past is we look to interpret the signage as best we can. That we might not be measuring the graphics or logos associated with it so much, but try to more concentrate on the actual letters per se. And that's how we've tried to get around that in the past. So it's a question once again, at least from the planning and zoning is how tight Or, what flexibility do you kind of want to see?
Correct. And I think that there's got to be a way to produce some language in there for it being different for a single use building versus a multiple tenant building, because that multiple tenant building is obviously going to need more sign locations, whether they're on one side or two sides. We haven't crossed that bridge yet. Then like a single tenant would be with the ABC remodeling on a couple different facades, where you run into trouble is like 4120 Richard Avenue, where you've got a Western Bank and you've got tenants that face major roads or major viewpoints for people, and they want stuff on the front and the back of the building. Because there's no real back of a building in a position like that. The buildings are finished on all four sides and they're beautiful from any location. I think that there needs to be some accommodation for that. Whether it's, whoever's putting that up, but there's multiple examples of that in Hermantown already, but you see it all the time down in the Twin Cities where you're cruising by on the freeway, you're actually looking at the back of the building and you see all their signs, and you pull around to the other side of the building where the parking lot is and they have all their signs out there too. And I think there's got to be some leeway for that, because you get multiple tenant buildings like 4140 Richard Avenue, where you've got 6 or 8 different tenants in there and only 3 or 4 of them can get signs on the building with the current code because of the size of the signs. And that building there faces 3 different roads essentially. The top tenant in that building would love to have their sign on 3 different facades facing around the city to advertise that they're there. And instead they get one little 2x5 spot on the monument sign. I think there needs to be some better discussion on signage on multi-tenant buildings, especially as you're going to see more and more of them coming in at multiple floors. I totally understand not wanting it to look like a NASCAR where it's totally cluttered. I feel like the one in front of the mall, the 2-story one in front of the mall that's got the black rock or black water and stuff like that in it. Is that what that little restaurant's called?
Yep.
I feel some of those signs are a little too big and there's a few too many on there, but I don't have a problem with them being on multiple layers either, on multiple levels.
And that's another question that way, like I said, is, right now, we, for the most part, our buildings are all single story, but we are seeing more multiple.
We have
You know,
several multiple.
Yeah, so, but it's the same as, do you cap the height for signage? Do you say no, that it's allowed on multiple floors? And we do not get into that ordinance. We do not get into that right now. Right now, we basically, the frontage is whatever the address of the building is. So in Richard, we take the measurement along Richard.
Sure.
So. Yeah, and that's, and it said right now the way it's, and we had a lot of discussion back and forth with staff and just never really got to a point that we could really come to consensus even at our end that way.
I mean, I'm open to having a discussion with everybody on the board here, but what their thoughts might be, and maybe they've never ever thought about that because they've never run into that scenario before. But I mean, there's quite a few new buildings in Hermantown, even over the last 5 or 6 years, that there are signs that could be or are on multiple sides of the building because of the positioning of the building versus the traffic patterns in that area. A great example would be the Burger King, the Domino's building on the highway. I mean, there's signs literally on all 4 sides of that building. 3 of them you see constantly up and down the highway. And I'm sure that that's probably not allowed under this.
Yeah, like I say, right now it would be allowed, but you'd get your 200 square, or basically to get your 2 per square feet. And it's how you break it up. Like I said, if you wanted to have a sign on 3 sides, you could, but that's all coming off of, let's call it 100 foot long building. Of your 200 square feet, each one is eating into that per se.
Correct.
Says we're not restricting where signs can be. We're just restricting the square footage of it.
And that needs to be expanded.
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, I'm just spitballing now, but is it the idea of doing 2 square feet for every lineal foot on that particular road, for example? So that Domino's building, for example, would have the lineal footage that's facing the Quick Trip and the lineal footage that's facing the highway. That would allow you to get up there to get the signage that those national tenants are looking for.
And maybe it's not so much the word road frontage, because in a couple, like for instance, I'm going to say the Burger King spot,
Yep.
because the backside that faces Bullion's is not a roadway,
Correct.
but you're sure there'd probably, if there's not already, there'd like to be a sign there.
There are signs.
That it's
there.
maybe a finished facade or something like that.
Right.
That obviously you're not gonna put it in the back of the other building where it faces a residence, doesn't make any sense, but.
Correct. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, there's gotta be some common sense to it, but there also has to be accommodation for as we're getting more and more not mom and pop businesses in the city where their corporations have got strict guidelines on what the signage needs to be. I mean, it's tough to do. And I don't know if that can be handled on a case by case basis. I mean, maybe there's a way to do that.
I still think it should be the square footage. If you have a 60, you already give them the ones on the 20, I mean, the 100. But then that 2 feet for every square foot on the 60 side, that's the size on that side. And then each one get it from that. If you only have 60 feet, then that's the amount of signage you can have on that side is where I've always read it as that. And I fought for that with the city of Duluth and have gotten that.
Mhm.
This is, I'm not asking for a 40-foot sign here. I have it on the front, but not on the side because this is a shorter side. So that you are more in line with what the size of the building. It's sort of consistently going around.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then so maybe that's the question or debate. Do you allow it on sides that face a road? And then same thing, you can put it on all 4 sides if you want. You're getting additional square footage on that. Let's just call it the 60 wall.
Mhm.
Because before you just get it on the 100 wall. And same thing, you want to have it on 4 sides, that's fine. You've got a little bit higher number. It's just how you break it up.
No, but you do the 2 foot.
I know what you're saying, but do we want to go that way? And I'm asking this to the group.
Right.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're saying every wall.
From a national tenant coming in, it's required. If we're wanting the commercial buildings to grow, keep them in, we can do a lot of stuff to make them look good. But your building added a ton of signage. I point it to your building all the time. You've got a lot of signage, but it looks good. It's not overwhelming. It's really difficult. Gordy's building, we have 29 tenants in there. And I'm making new signs right now. In fact, I've got one left to do. And it's tough because we've not allowed, because of having battles with the city, we've not been allowed to do different things. So we're trying to come up with a nice in between the big sign that we have and then what's on the walls.
And that's at least with staff, that was the debate back, is if we don't address multiple sides, the thought was, and I'm talking staff, that's where the monument sign or the pylon sign comes in, that you have.
But you can't read it.
Yep, and so that's,
And then that becomes worthless except for, because you've got somebody swinging through, that becomes an issue too. It's tough.
and
Yeah,
so I'm
it's
gonna
not
take
easy.
this one step further then, let's say on your addressed frontage, that you get 2 square feet per lineal foot. But maybe on your sidewall, you get 1 square foot. Because you think about it, if you've got a 60, if you've got 120 square feet on a 60-foot wall, that could be that could be some big signage.
Mhm.
And do we want to control that by saying, no, you get, on your main, you get 2 square, on your sidewall, it's 1, it's a half, whatever it is. That we're still not NASCARing it or having large signs,
Right.
but we're still at least
That's a good.
providing some flexibility.
Where did the 2-foot rule come from? Is that like a nationwide standard or?
It's just, you see a lot of different measurements throughout. It's what the city had established years ago. So when I said there's really no rhyme or reason to it that way. But like I said, once put the advent I did some work years ago in Hilton Head. And they had one of the strictest sign policies you could ever see. They're controlling awning colors and everything. And it was this uniformity. And so you just had block letters and it was very easy to control and do those things. Said, I'm gonna pick on your building, Joe, with, is it Peak?
Mhm.
Who's you look at their sign, that's a big sign.
It's a big sign.
And, if you measure that whole signage, wow, I don't even know what the square footage of that off my top of my head, but it's a large number.
Mhm.
And that's what we happened. And even with Friends and Bank and the dental that came in next to it, the dental came second and they had like 10 square feet left over. It's like, how do you accommodate those things? And that's why the discussion was each tenant bay is guaranteed X number of square feet. That's one way around it. Or maybe, like you said, that you start opening it up for the sidewalls and you maybe have language that even if you don't put it on that sidewall, you still have gained that extra 30 square feet.
Wouldn't that fall on the landlord though, or do they all have to come individually?
It's tough because as a landlord, you get 10 tenants and you get so much square footage. And let's say you get 20 square feet for your sign and now your sign is 18 inches tall and 12 feet long to get to that. And it's so small, you can't read it. It's not an easy scenario. It really isn't. And we've been duking it out for 17 years on this.
And like I said, if we had all signage or block letters, it's easier to do that because, a developer can do a master sign plan. It's like, I've seen it before in the architectural world, sign band.
Yep.
And here it is, here's your rectangle and this is what you get. But we're not at the point where we're controlling that. We're allowing logos, this, that, graphics. So it blows that out of the water. So it's hard on the developer in a master sign plan.
It really is because every tenant has their own individual identity and their own individual brand, and they want to bring that through with their signage.
Yep.
And that is one of the first questions I hear from anybody I talk to. What can we do for signage? And it's on the existing buildings where I know already, it's an easy answer. You can look at what the last tenant had and kind of replicate that, but on something new, it's difficult. We're working on a new project for here in Hermantown, and to be honest with you, the monument sign would be way too small. If you've got the same thing at Gordy's, you've got 20 some tenants in the facility.
Yep.
And the signs become so tiny, it's not even worth doing.
Or like you said, you just represent like the two anchors. And then the rest of them are, sorry, you're not on the sign, or your band is much smaller.
Right.
So,
Yeah, no, it's difficult. And we used to do it based on square footage. We used to say whoever had the most square footage got the bigger sign, and that wasn't fair in the long run because a national tenant like a Starbucks is a much smaller square footage than even a law office is today. It's
But they
really,
demand the most.
yes, yeah, yeah. But I mean, that's just, it's a battle and it's not easy to do. And I think I can't come up with an example of a building in Hermantown that I think is oversigned that is just beyond stupid. It's just, I can't come up with that yet. So, I mean, whatever the city's been doing over the last 7 years to accommodate special requests for signs on multiple sides of buildings or to squeak past the code a little bit has worked just fine. Because again, I can't come up with one that's ridiculous.
I have to take a time out. My battery is running out on my computer and this is where we're taping. So I apologize. I'll be right back.
It's all good.
And you can see me crawl around on the floor, which is a scary sight with two movies.
Do you want me to do it for you? You want me to do something for you?
No, I'm gonna pause it for you.
Well, when you're dealing with national accounts, they're not gonna budget if they want to put their stock.
No,
They can't. They're not supposed to.
they can, but they don't want to. But no, even a small mom and pop wants the biggest sign they can possibly get. I think a lot of people make mistakes on their signs. Like it doesn't need to say due north in huge letters. It needs to say pizza because you're driving by on the highway. You don't know what due north is, but you know what pizza is. There's a lot of things that could change with signs as well, but this is a difficult one for anybody that does commercial development. That is for sure.
Hermantown could spring for a high definition screen instead of the low definition that they put up. So I drive past that every day and you can't hardly read what they
Can't
put
even
on
read it.
Yeah.
Right. On the
Drives me
digital-
nuts.
Yeah.
In Superior, we do have the ability to, on a like just the strips, that we have so much over the front
Sure.
that however wide your front is, you get that percentage of the front, which makes it nice. Then everybody, if you've got a little more square footage, you can spread it out a little bit, but everybody gets a spot.
Right, like Hermantown Square where Mackenzie's is, that one turned
Yeah.
out great. All the signs are basically the same size and they lay out because those units are all basically the same size.
Mhm.
You know, but again, down at the Burger King and Domino's or at the Western Bank Building where it's like.
But
Western
I
Bank's got
don't
signs
think-
on three sides, but it doesn't look bad.
But I don't think Mackenzie's would qualify now.
I'd have to check on that. Jim was pretty strict with me back then.
Was he?
Yeah,
I was looking at one time and I thought, boy, I want
I
that.
thought the Pelican Coffee one was probably overboard. But that's come down now because I used to have the one facing
Right.
the credit union.
And yeah,
But that's again an example of two
perfect.
roads.
And it should be.
You know, no different than that New Franzen Bank. That's facing two roads right
Right.
now.
It was funny when I saw this, I went, oh, man. No.
So in that same vein, as I fall out of my chair, we had a national fast food chain that already existed in Duluth that wanted to come to Hermantown. And they walked because of signage.
Hmm?
And in their case, there was a lot of signage.
But some of those places have tons of signage, especially
Yeah.
if you start counting the graphics in their windows.
Exactly, and that's what we started to touch on,
You
In this
did
ordinance a bit
touch
too.
on this.
Yeah. because like, for instance, King of Creams.
That was the one I was just thinking of. Yep.
Mhm. So,
And should that be counted?
right, the way this is envisioned is it goes towards your 200 square.
Right,
I
it was
disagree
counted
with that.
on that building, it was counted towards it, but like the
Mhm.
banners that change in the window of Burger King, for example, for their slushy of the month, those never counted. Cause it wasn't like a permanent
Yeah.
name of the
But it
business.
says in here, paper does,
Yeah, I know.
not a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, but it all depends on how strict somebody's gonna read the code and
Mhm.
enforce it.
But it shouldn't be, we shouldn't be saying that. We should say, should the code say it at all or not?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I'd love to hear people's suggestions or ideas or what you've seen in other cities, cause it's. Like I said, you drive around any major city and there's signs on multiple sides of every building,
The way this reads, that's not allowed.
pretty much.
Well, it's not that it's not allowed, that we're not, you can put them on multiple sides, but you're getting your longest frontage is where we're measuring it from. So I'm just using 100 long building because it's easy math.
Right.
So,
Just general question, since I'm by far an expert on this and have never really thought of it till today, but, just as time changes, obviously, since this ordinance was written, things are different, but now that you're getting into more of digital signage and as the costs become less with LCD and LED and everything else, but is there any kind of direction in this code towards that? So if you're a business, could you just put up a bunch of flashing signs everywhere? So
Can't
when you
have,
drive
no,
around,
they're all
of a sudden-
limited in here.
Yeah,
yeah, we do address like reader boards and different things like that.
so motion video.
We had a business that's coming in, wanted to put up a 5x10 LED reader board. And since, once again, it's like, never seen one that big. So we looked around and the Odd Shrine has one. And so we measured that. I think that was generally a 4x8. And so we said to this person, says, we're in the midst of a sign ordinance. You should do a 4x8. And they said, sure, we'll do that. But if you don't put upper limits on things, said 5x10 and granted it's along the highway, but that's a big sign.
Well, the two in Duluth are huge.
The-
On Central Entrance. They're not on a bill, they are on.
Lamar's, the
The-
We're
billboard.
talking
Yeah.
billboard. one.
Yeah, exactly, billboards. We don't get into the billboards that way. We do have that's a class D sign. But we were just at least more touching a bit more on the C
Okay.
signs on that.
I
what
didn't
you'd see
see
in a
D
building and
in
things
here,
like
so
that. Oh, I got you.
because it was in here.
Sure.
yeah. Then the other is the moving parts of, things with moving things you're saying none of those.
Yeah, because the problem is it would deem as a safety issue as far as I guess, what is your definition of moving things?
Grand opening, I've got something out there flinging around.
A lot of those we call as a temporary sign. It's currently had a guy that
Whatever.
bounces all around like that. We view those as temporary, that we don't generally get into those.
Okay.
Now, if that was somebody had it incorporated into a permanent sign, it would be prohibited in here.
Another simple one, 14-2006, danger to traffic. The word stop, go slow, caution, danger, warning. What about the signs that people put in the neighborhoods? Slow down, kids. don't-
Kids crossing, things like that, that's not envisioned as part of this,
But it's a sign.
but it's a sign though. It's true. And once again, how much do we want to regulate?
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying.
Mhm.
If you say no, then somebody's gonna scream no when they. And we have places where we put slow down because the traffic flies on the backside of our buildings. And we put slow down signs on those.
Mhm.
And this would say, I couldn't put those up there. And yet it's a safety issue not to have that there.
Have we ever looked at other cities? I mean, we're not the first city to run into this.
That's Gunnar Johnson did a lot of work looking at other communities. And you've seen some, I mean, Duluth, I think they hired a consultant
And they would.
to write a sign ordinance. You see other, that was one of the discussions we had is, do we want to keep this just a word format ordinance? Because you look at some other communities, they have graphic pictures, they have examples. You know, that's pretty,
Cut me right.
yeah. And we chose not to go that way. So-
Again, I fall back on my statement where I can't come up with a building in Hermantown that looks ridiculous today. I mean, is there a way to move forward with something like this where somebody could come and ask for a special use sign ordinance if they had some real crazy requirements where they had to come, so you wouldn't have to turn away that fast food place, for example?
Yeah, right now, that's not the nature of the variances or special uses that way.
Okay.
That gets into like a setback or things like that. That the variance is not meant to circumvent those type of,
Sure, but instead of losing that prospective business in the city, couldn't they come to us with a presentation of what they want to create and have somebody look at it and go, yep, that's fine, or gosh, that's really overkill? You know, and I realize that line's got to be drawn somewhere, and all of us would probably draw that line in a different spot. I get that, but there's got to be some common sense on that.
and that's why we want to have flexibility, but we don't want it to be subjective.
Okay.
And that's where you start running into, it's like architectural codes that I'm
Mhm.
sure you run into.
Mhm.
Is I think a pink building with orange spots looks nice, but you don't. And
And we had one turn around because they wouldn't let the colors come in. So, yeah, I mean, it's a killer.
so that, I mean, at least Eric, the person, I see some potential merit in including at least one additional side of a building, that has multiple frontages. The question is, like I said, I'm Eric. I'm not necessarily the city at this point, so.
Right.
But it's, I guess I said, let's just turn this is turning more into like a discussion. This is not going to go forward tonight, and I don't think it should.
Mhm.
I think this is at least, a good point to start discussing some of these things.
Can
The
we
same thing, it's like,
submit some writing of explanations of some of these hot points and for,
yeah, we can go further with that. And, I guess with this, I'm gonna look to more of the development-based people on the council, or I guess, what are some other things that you've encountered in different communities? They says, this seemed to work well, or that was just a bad idea.
I was saying in Superior on strips, we get so much square footage per bay
Mm-hmm.
over whatever their front is. And that's sort of based on that. And if they front both sides, they get both sides. It's trying to accommodate everybody, and yet having it to where it's so much per side and more equal. You know, your neck can't be huge, but if you've got a lot longer, you could fill that out. If your bay is wider than the next bay that's narrow. Where Austin Jaro and Chico's and all of those, they've done that again. That's how they give it to you, is how much you got over there. You get like 80% of over your windows. So it makes it equally.
So I have a random question. Being more familiar with institutional signage and standards and things like that, not wanting to maybe become, here's exactly all the fonts you have to use and here's exactly what you have to do. Is there some process or way where the city could basically say, you can propose your signage and we'll have some sort of basis on what it needs to look like, depending on the size of the building, the location, et cetera. And you can help facilitate kind of the signage master plan so that the city is giving, you know, specific instruction, but not necessarily limiting or letting someone do more than someone else, if that makes sense at all.
Well, right now, you have to do a sign permit and it comes in, it's reviewed by the building department. Says, does this meet the requirements? That's to say you've got a 30-foot long building. Actually, I'm going to pick on like an O'Reilly Auto Parts, a standalone that still has some decent frontage. We would measure, it's like, okay, it's 60 feet wide. You get 120 square feet. We just do some measurement. Okay, it works. Right now it says, well, there's a graphic associated with it. What flexibility do we have to kind of make this work? So we do that in a way, but I don't believe, and nor do I think we should go the route of, once again, aesthetics and get into that. And I could see with institutional, because a lot of it's about branding and you want to have the same look that way.
I guess a better example would be like if you take, if O'Reilly's was in, for lack of a better example, the Hermantown marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they wanted multiple signs. Instead of just taking a blank square footage, you could say, here's Hermantown marketplace. As long as you can follow these general guidelines, here's what you could do. And have flexibility in that sense, instead of having a hard and fast like square footage number.
Right now, we generally group our, like a C sign, for instance, is allowed in all the commercial based districts, marketplace, C1, CA, et cetera, BLM. That's how we kind of cover those things. So, like I said, right now, it's just totally based on a square footage basis. And for the most part, I said, it generally works for single user buildings.
Oh, for sure.
So like I said, it's the hard part, you know, as we start getting more development and multi-tenant buildings, that's where the issue becomes.
Would
You
it
know,
work at all to make the fee schedule reflect how much signage you want and how many?
No, we don't want to go that route because you just buy your way into more signs. So, I mean, part of me,
On a scale that would make it, you know, I'm not saying it's $20 more if you want another sign. It's
But that tenant's paying for it, not the landlords. And we don't have a whole lot of, we still need to be able to control something too.
so I'm throwing some stuff out there is the ability to measure at a minimum 2 building sides, assuming they have road frontage. And I can say, like it, don't like it. I'm hearing the idea of a minimum allotment per bay. So at least you know you're guaranteed 25 square feet or whatever it is, or 50 square. So that helps the last person coming in. I guess I'm trying to think what else.
Until you have a multi-tenant building that we're changing walls to add shrink. It goes from 4 to 8 pretty quickly.
Yep, and that's what we talked about as well. That's why
And
we
then all of a
didn't.
sudden we have a problem.
That's why we didn't go that route
Right.
from the staff is what happens, same thing, that the 4 bay user becomes 1.
Right.
But then you still say,
Where you've got a bay that doesn't face a major road,
Right.
like Bolton and Mink behind Valentini's.
mhm.
You know, they don't face a major road. They still want a sign.
Well, in theory, you say it faces 53.
No, it faces Sugar Maple.
Bolton Mink, the way it's turned there.
Bolton Mink has 2 suites in that building. They have the old CrossFit in the back and their suite facing the front.
Oh, so you're saying that the suite and back that.
Yeah, there's a suite that doesn't even face the highway. Or like the 3-story building on Richard Avenue, you've got tenants that are only on the Haynes Road side and tenants that are only on the Richard Avenue side. I mean, it's a quagmire when you go multi-story and multi-tenant. It really is. It's not easy.
No. And then I'm
And
gonna,
that should be its own category.
That very well might be it. That might
I
be an
think that's
easy way to
the
do that.
solution.
Because you've got some.
multi-tenant, multi-story, or just
Yes.
yeah. I think that we can handle multi-tenant, single story. I think there's
Right.
a route forward with that.
Right.
But it's- yeah.
With a side on the streets.
Yeah, on streets.
I agree with that. I think that, but if, when you get into a multi-tenant, multi-story, it does, because you do have a whole different thing that they should get this side, they should get this side.
Yeah.
And not both.
Or take our new building on Richard Avenue, for example, with Famous Dave's in it. Famous Dave's would love to have signs on 3 sides. They would love to have their sign over their front door, the sign facing Maple Grove, and they'd love to have a sign in the back facing Sam's Club, right? Then they only went with 2 because we were trying to save on square footage. Now the 2 other tenants on the ground level have signs on the building, but nobody upstairs does. And they all want them, but where do you put them? You don't put them down low in front of another tenant space, and then they start to look dumb when they're up there by themselves. I mean, it's crazy.
And so now I'm gonna go on that same rationale that we did on long side, short side. Maybe you say on a multi-story building, let's say we have 3 stories, we have 3 sign bands, for lack of better words.
Mhm.
And it's, once again, we'll use our 100-foot long building. Instead of saying each, right now we say you get 200 square feet.
Right.
We don't want to say, and this is, I don't believe we want to say you get 200 square feet
Per
per each,
floor.
per floor.
Right.
Maybe on multi-story buildings, it's 1 square foot per frontage per band. And then, at the end of the day, it's 300 square feet versus 200 square feet. You just accommodated more signs, but you kept it within reason.
Right.
And
That there's
size.
But where
some
do you
smaller
do that?
sizes that way.
Yeah.
In that 3-story office building on Richard Avenue, I had to put my foot down and say, nobody in the tower portion, the 3-story section can have a sign.
Mhm.
Because I couldn't make everybody happy. It was impossible.
Sure.
But you've got, real estate agents in there, you've got engineers in there, you've got accounting firms, you've got financial services, you've got state farm agents, and none of them have any signs on the building. And they would all take them tomorrow if I would let them.
Mhm.
But I had to stop it because we couldn't figure out a way to do it, and I had that conversation with the city at the same time. How do you do this?
Yeah.
It's just a bridge that hasn't been crossed yet.
I do think that would be a good separate thing. I think it's worthy of having its own special.
And if that was a 6 or 7-story office building and had different floors, I think it's dumb to have them in the 2nd floor, the 3rd floor, the
Mhm.
4th floor. I can see the main level and I can see the top if you had a big tenant in there, like our new office building that we're working on, it's got a bank that wants to go in and they want basically naming rights of the building. And how do you accomplish that with some of the restrictions in the sign code with the other 6 tenants in the building? They want it to be known as ABC Bank Building, it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. This is actually tougher than most of the things we face.
Mhm.
Most of the things we face are check the box. Yep, this makes sense. Have a nice day. But this one is difficult, especially looking forward and the changes you're seeing in the buildings and the projects coming to the city. Like you said, you don't want to lose a business.
Mhm.
You don't want to be anti-business just because of your sign ordinance.
And I'm gonna use an example on pylon signs. We have in the ordinance, you have X number of square feet of road frontage, you get 1 sign. You go up to the 300 to 500, you get a 2nd sign. That maybe multi-story will say, for instance, and I'm just talking, 2-story building, each band is 2 square feet. 3-story, it kind of, as you get taller buildings, let's say it's a 7-story building, each band gets a half a square foot. So you still, at the end of the day, you don't have 1,000 square feet of sign on there, but you might have 500 where in reality, you could only have 200. That you've still kept it within reason, but you have some, like a better words, multiplier as a building increases in size or floors.
And then you get like one of the buildings in our new project that we're working on, there's areas that the tenants they don't even face the road.
Mhm.
They still want a sign over their door, It's really difficult, honestly. For somebody who lives it day in and day out, it is difficult. And I know you know what I'm talking about, Pat.
Oh, yeah.
Most people don't even think about it. It doesn't even cross their mind. You know, but if you have to live with it and try to answer those questions, it is not easy to put it on paper.
I agree that most people don't think about it, so I don't think we have any sort of problem right now. The other thing I guess I'm struggling to wrap my head around is why, you know, all four sides wouldn't be accommodated. I mean, for me, I wouldn't put a sign facing my back parking lot. It just wouldn't really make sense. Same in the back of Gordy's facing.
Right.
But if there was a small tenant that if they might only have a customer or two that stop by a day, it's nice to see that signage. I'm kind of struggling with that.
Sure, it maybe gets to that same rationale I just spoke about with multiple stories, that multiple sides, the main address side is 2 square feet. Secondary frontage side, 1 square feet. Rear and back side,
1 square feet.
half square foot? I don't know. That
Yeah, but-
same thing that you ratchet it down, but but at the end of the day, you can still combine all that and have one really big sign.
And I don't know even if it needs to be combined, so
Combine it. I
you
would
don't
say
get
just
away.
Per sides.
Okay.
Per
I would
side?
just say
Yeah, I'm
per
bored with
side,
that.
Okay.
not combined. No, I don't like the combined, but I do like it per side because you do have in Gordy's, you have a bunch of tenants that is their main entrance, and we've allowed them to put signs up there because that's the only way you know where they are.
Mhm.
So I have one last question, just for sake of argument, I guess. Because I totally get the business perspective and I can see how this would be really challenging, right?
Oh, it's-
Especially as you have different tenants and different levels of tenants, et cetera. So I get essentially what a business wants. They want to maximize their visibility, like maximize their business. From the city's perspective, I mean, what's the city's goal with the sign ordinance in general? Is it
To provide clarity and prevent the conversations that we have with Joe when the 4th tenant comes in. And I'm just picking on you.
That's
Because you're
fine.
doing
Let me have it.
you're doing multi-tenant buildings.
Right.
Is when, you know, the guy, because honestly, it's not Joe coming to me, it's the business owner or the person repping them.
Mhm.
They're ready to sign on the line and they can only get 3 square feet of signs. What's wrong with you, city? And we say, you don't want to say, well, you should have talked to Joe because if you had to control the signage better, you wouldn't be into this issue that way.
But how much is,
But-
how much of this actually just should be in the landlord's hands as opposed to the city's hands? It seems like we're kind of, we're trying to put objective guidelines on a really subjective issue.
Right.
Especially the way the city of Hermantown is designed. I mean, you know, you can see if it was more like a downtown, if we had a downtown area where you'd want to give each business kind of an equal opportunity. You're kind of doing a narrow corridor, but we're really scattered. And a lot of this probably falls maybe on the landlord themselves. And do we want to be the city that takes that decision away from the landlord to control the signage and control which tenant deserves the big sign, which tenant doesn't? Is my building ugly? Is it not? Is it marketable? Is it not? So how do we, I don't know if there's an education level for us or for the city, but you know, why did we want this ordinance here? Why did we want this ordinance here? And is there flexibility to run that? And, you know, I mean, we're trying to, it seems like a tough balance because we're trying to create an objective standard for something that's really subjective in its own. So how do we run that? You know, if we're just doing foot by foot, well, then all of a sudden we might have a landlord that misses out on a really a really big tenant that could potentially change their whole business model just because they want a bigger sign. Well, why not give them the bigger sign? It might be on the highway. It might be in the back road. There's so much going on. We don't have that business corridor like typical cities do. So I don't know the answer, but it sounds like, an education piece on certain ideas might be part of it.
kind of bouncing off what Dante said,
Mhm.
having never thought of this until this agenda packet came out. It seems I'm not really following the square footage, like 2 square feet per linear foot, or it just, to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems very, like you kind of said, I mean, you just pick a number, but it doesn't necessarily translate into reality.
To be honest, that has worked out fairly good over my
Has it?
17 years of doing this. That is gonna be real close, but you run into the scenarios where you've got the multi-floor or the tenant that doesn't face the street and stuff like that. It works great 80% of the time, honestly. I mean, and again, I've been dealing with Hermantown for 17 years on this and not picking on the city, but I don't know how to answer these questions. And I've been thinking about it for almost 2 decades. I don't have the solution.
So maybe it's more of a landlord's responsibility slash how you classify a building.
But the problem is changes.
Right.
A building changes so drastically in a 10-year period, you would not believe
Right.
how a building changes.
The all new people.
Well, even the technology.
Not
yeah,
only
the
people-
Signs I meant.
Not only
Yeah.
technology of signs, but you have, this guy has now taken 2.5 times this one, and this guy's got it is this. It's crazy. I mean,
And like I
it's
said, I
crazy.
think 80% of the time you can fall back on the 2 square feet per.
That we
lineal
can
foot.
only have.
So,
You know, that works, but I think there's gotta be a way where somebody who really is looking for change and feels that they need it and they can present their case, they can get 25% more or something like that. I realize you'd run into that case all the time though, because every tenant wants the biggest sign.
They
can
want the
possibly
biggest
get.
sign. And I think that's been more the issue is, as like I said, it's easy on, who's your end cap on your 6,000 square foot building? The bank,
Western Bank.
Western Bank. Western Bank's easy because it's a linear sign band.
Yep.
It's hard on the peak housing. It's hard on the ones that have a lot of more ornate type of things. It's the same thing. If you snap the polyline around that whole thing, that's a big sign.
That's a big sign. I agree.
And so, but like I said, Western Bank type works out great, more than you can probably,
Right,
with
but-
your 200 square, you could probably accommodate it.
But Western Bank has 3 signs.
Yeah, it's 3 sides, but it'd be kind of curious, what's the depth on that, is that a 25 bay or
There's this 27. There's
27? So in
wide.
theory, they get 54 square feet.
Right,
in
and
each
they're over
one.
that with their 3 signs.
Yeah. So it's,
So
I
a question
think
I
it-
pose to maybe the business community is there a certain aspect of this that we want regulated? So it makes it easier on the landlord, for example? So that you can't go, this and my hands are tied, or is it, do you want that? Does the business community want that full flexibility to really be able to negotiate with their tenant?
Yeah, like I said, I had literally had to put my foot down on the 3-story building and said, nobody gets a sign, period. And they were pissed with me, big time. The leases are already signed. They're expecting to get signage. I had done some sign renditions of where we thought we might go because I was presenting my case to the city to get more square footage, and I finally said, nope, none.
And to me, that's a good example of maybe it's better left in the landlord's hands than it is in the city's.
Well, for me, if I was one of your tenants, I would say if I'm paying for this space,
Yeah.
I need to be able to have people find me.
Correct.
Exactly.
And
Yeah,
I
it's-
need a sign.
Honestly, it's been in my mind for 17 years and I can't solve it.
So what happens if you have no signage ordinance?
it's a
It
free
turns
for all.
into a
That's- I mean,
NASCAR. That's why I
yeah.
use the NASCAR symbol. I mean, you don't want it to turn into a NASCAR, but you want it to be presentable and you want it to be nice. And my idea of nice and presentable might be different than yours, and that's why there's
Mhm.
gotta be some guidelines for it. But again, you don't want to let businesses walk because they can't get a sign.
And we're lucky in the fact that we don't have a business corridor in a way, because I think of the central entrances. Our attorney was talking about, I think it was like a specific state highway in Bemidji or Brainerd or something like that, where the businesses are tight up on the roadway and you sight down it and you see nothing but signs.
And yeah.
And you look at it and
Denver,
says, this is ugly.
Yeah, Denver is just.
Yeah.
What about making 2 different things? What if there's a sign ordinance for the C commercial, basically the highway where everybody faces the one road, and you change it for the marketplace? Where you've got people driving around all sides of all the buildings.
Well, just to play a devil's advocate, Eric, we're going, well, this is ugly, but we don't want to get into whether it looks good or not.
Right.
Right.
So.
It's almost, I wouldn't say too ugly, but it's almost like.
I know what
too
you
much-
mean.
Yeah, too much
I've
signage.
had
or-
I've had things that have that impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get what you mean, but
Yeah.
we're trying not to get into subjectiveness, but we're trying to say that
It's
was
also
the ugly.
detriment to the businesses because if
Yeah.
you see too many signs, it's just like, oh, it's just
Well, in a
like-
way, I mean, I like kind of where Beth was going, that if you just don't have it specific to zoning, just keep it commercial, so it's still C1, CH marketplace. That it's that same. You get your 2 square on your major frontage. And yeah, you can have 1 square on the other ones if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to.
Right.
Right.
I mean, it's like I said, and some of them it won't happen because there's no,
No,
yeah.
you
So,
won't have more.
yeah,
If you combine, you will.
but yeah,
You say
exactly.
Per side, some people are going, I'm not gonna waste my money over there. Another one will go, sure, I want that.
Mhm.
Our building in Miller Plaza, we have, we have some in on the ends, we have some different places,
Sure.
but that's how I got a tenant in there, is to say, look I'll give you this one up here, that you can see all the way down the central entrance.
Right.
You have to do it.
You know, and like I said, I think there's more and more places off the highway that are facing multiple roads or multiple directions on the same road. The oil change place is a prime example on Haynes Road. They've got signs facing north and signs facing south, and I bet if I put a tape measure on it, they're over the ordinance today.
Oh, yeah.
You know, but it doesn't look bad. That's what I'm
Mhm.
getting at. I mean, there's got to be a way to,
Per side.
yeah, to frame that. Yeah.
So is there some takeaways that we want to give the city, or like our 5 top points, and they come back at it? I mean, bring it back to this board for us to.
So Eric,
or
did
how do we want to move forward?
piggybacking on what Corey's saying here, Gunner did a lot of this.
Gunner did a lot, yeah. And it's just, it was back and forth with staff, and it was kind of that same thing. It's like,
Staff was involved and okay.
Same thing, we had the discussion about multiple signage, in the multiple stories, and this, it wasn't gaining traction. It was just like, no, let's keep it simple, but by keeping it simple, it's not meeting a lot of the needs of business owners, it sounds like.
Sorry.
So, and that's why I, what you're saying, Sam and Valerie, is basically, it's great to hear from a pedestrian standpoint, for lack of better words, what your thoughts are, what, things that you see. And so, it's good to hear those things as well. So I mean, one more, I'm just on Corey, but I think as a staff that we'd love to hear, you should look at X, Y, and Z. And then we can do, as a staff standpoint, okay, what communities have something like that will help us either craft the language, or no, we can't find it, we'll just craft it ourselves.
Sure.
Right, and that's what I was kind of thinking. just to-
Yeah, because otherwise we can be here all night
Right,
talking.
yeah.
That's it. That's what I was thinking. What was the process?
Sure.
And so as Commissioner Colquitt was going to talk about takeaways,
Mhm.
do we need an
If
education
we
on the
could write
process?
emails together, some different things, and then at least send it between us, and then between us, send it to them. Because there are a lot of things that, the abandoned signs. I think of the one that, Plusnik has for the old building on the second, not the Subaru behind.
Mhm. Yep.
We have protected that sign like crazy, because knowing that you'll never get that again if that sign comes down. Are you saying abandoned face and leaving the structure there so I can replace the face? Or are you now talking about taking down that precious thing that we know we'll never get back, so we protect it at all costs?
And I have to look at some clarification on that. So,
Don't even ask.
Well, I did that, those are huge. I mean, we tell people, we have one ugly one on 4th Street, ugly. And yet it's like, don't touch it. You can reface it. Don't touch anything else about it, because they don't allow these. We at all costs, don't hit it. Don't touch, we know we'll never be back again. That's where that kind of stuff. I mean, it's important, especially like that when it's out in the middle of nowhere.
yeah, like I said, it's almost, it's like a grandfathered sign, essentially. It's like, yeah, as long as you replace the face, you're still
Just the
fine.
face.
But if that sign came down, you put up a fresh one, it'd be smaller than that.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Mhm.
All right, so how do we want to move forward? Do you want to give us like 3 or 5 snapshots, Corey, of what you're taking away here? Do you want to?
Well, I think
draft emails.
You guys got this. I don't know if we even can do that, right?
Yeah, I know in
Yeah.
council it's an issue because you can't, in
Right.
theory, it's open
Right.
meeting laws that way. I don't
Oh,
know. if
that's
it
right.
I guess
pertains to-
most simply then my formal comments would be, is there some way you could make more of a sliding scale instead of just having like a blanket square footage? So you could address different buildings, whether it's multi-story, multi-tenant, or single use, something like that, even 3 categories instead of 1.
So I think we've got a handle on single story, multi-tenant. I'm gonna throw it out and I can get the head nods or thumbs down. 2 on the major roadway. 1 on the secondary roadway. 1 on the back and the side,
Yeah,
half
there's-
on the back and the side.
I like 2 all the way around.
Yeah, it would be,
We won't go that way. That's
I'd
too
say-
far of a stray.
one, and
Staff.
1, and then 2 on the front. Because then you're not gonna put it on something that faces nowhere.
Yep, exactly.
Not-
And that's up to the owners.
Yes,
We're giving them the option.
but if they have parking all the way around the building, that changes things.
Mhm.
But if they don't, then they're never gonna use it, so it's just there.
I guess my second then would be following that would be, could you have a minimum square footage per signage per tenant and a maximum?
I don't think you want to go max because you don't know what that bay is gonna be. I think it's more the minimum, so then last person in is guaranteed that I've got 50 square feet.
At least
or 25 or something.
Or some way to say it's like a visible sign. So it can't just be like one sticker.
I think in my mind, and I'm not a developer in real estate, but the sign is more than just a placeholder. It's advertising
Mhm.
and, it's probably one of the cheapest kind of advertising a business can have.
But one of the things they put the most thought into too.
Exactly, and from my perspective, it's like, I want the biggest and as much as I can get.
that's every tenant.
And to hear you're gonna like pigeonhole it is kind of discouraging, I would think. Because we want these businesses to prosper
Yep.
and grow and survive. And without signage, it's tough to do.
Could each tenant have a minimum sign size? So like even if you had a multi-tenant building, everyone at least gets one minimum sign. And then you could still have some sort of,
In Gordy's, it would be just plaster.
Yeah, I was gonna say it might be a 0, might be the minimum sign. Like you said, you had to reject.
I basically tell everybody you can't do it.
And the pylon type doesn't work because it's too small, is that?
Depends on how many are in the building. In her case, she's got almost 30.
We figure out a way to get most of them on there by little 1 foot by 5 foot,
Can't read from
but you
that.
can't read.
Yeah.
Especially when it is stuck.
It's something, but also the gym that's huge square footage just shouldn't have the same size sign as somebody that's got 500 square feet.
No, they should.
It's really tough. It's a combination of the landlord doing stuff according to the guidelines the city's giving them.
And we try, we try to do the best we can, but there's still things that, boy, it's tough.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, that I think for the most part, it has worked.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's
Totally.
hard, the last tenant in, that's where we've been finding the problems.
Right, especially like Beth says, as buildings change over 10 or 15
Mhm.
years, that 3,000 square foot suite becomes 3 now, and then
Yes.
now you've got 50 square feet divided by 3 tenants to get signage. I mean, it's
And it happens.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's.
Well, in that case, he would still, well. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so I think we want some more guidance. If I'm not mistaken here, we'll make a motion shortly on more guidance on multi-story, multi-sided buildings. Does that make sense? Facing multiple directions or multiple roads?
2 different things.
Yeah, but we're looking for
Multiple
that same
story
thing. Yeah,
and then multiple sides.
correct.
And I guess I would be curious to see but there again, I never drove through a city and said, wow, their signage is dialed in this city. So, but I guess I'd be curious to see what other cities are doing as far as what that number is.
I have one that's really nice is Blaine around the soccer fields. They've done a nice job because there's so many buildings that are in the middle of, I'll call them parking lots, where there are 6 or 8 buildings and they're not facing roads. They're just on, and they all have nice signs for the tenants on front and rear because you can drive clean around all the buildings. honestly, that's my favorite one of all the ones I've driven around in is the Blaine area by the soccer fields.
Is that,
And there's a lot of tenants in that area, all the way from a Menards, all the way down to small pizza places.
now is that like monument signs, style signs?
No,
or
those are raised channel letter signs on the buildings.
Okay, now, well, I worked for Blaine back when we did same thing. The guy loved Hilton Head and he wanted at the point, anything along, what's the road? What's the main road that goes north-south?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember whatever. it is. He wanted all those uniform across the board.
Yeah, see, they're not anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
So-
like I said, that long strip mall that's got the Chipotle and stuff in it, all those, that's the back side of the building is facing the highway. And they all have nice
Sure.
signs. It
Yep.
doesn't look like the back of a building. It looks nice, but there's no parking out in front of it. There's no people walking in and out. But then the buildings that are ancillary to the primary buildings, which are next to the highway, they all have nice signs too. And it doesn't look out of place. It doesn't look like a cartoon. It doesn't look crazy. It's just nice. And I understand, again, not wanting it to be stupid and obnoxious. I get that too. But whoever's did that one did a really nice job in that area.
But that also makes a back of a building that sometimes is very ugly, look very nice.
Oh, for sure.
You're not thinking it is, oh, that's, they parked it. I remember Jim in Duluth said, you need to turn this building this way and move it. And all of a sudden, well, that's the back facing the road. Well, then you have to, then he goes, well, no, we'll have, let you put signs on that side too. And you dress it up in your architectural, all of a sudden that becomes a very good looking from all angles.
Yeah.
It dresses up a building. So
Yeah,
I think there's merit to it.
I mean, if you look at the 4 buildings we just built on Richard Avenue, they are finished
No.
100% all the way around.
Yeah.
You know, there's no front or back really to a couple of them.
So we have looking at other cities, multiple levels, what that would look like, and then multiple tenants seem to be the 3 big takeaways as of right now.
Yeah, like I said, I think it
multiple
covers
sides.
80% of the scenarios, no problem.
Multiple, oh, yeah, multiple sides.
And Eric, it's not uncommon for a city to model after somebody that's already done it, right?
Nope, not at all.
Yeah, so if it's something like we see maybe Blaine up here and we're like, that is perfect.
Mhm.
That's how you manage it. We could go that direction, could we?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those that, and honestly too, it's a lot of it is like, so you drive down and say, oh, I like the look of this.
Yeah.
And then you find it. Part of it is you gotta have the example.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's hard.
objective. It's
And like I said, that's why I think I was picking on either Bemidji or Brainerd. It's the same thing. You just saw the image of that state highway and you look at it, you're like,
yeah.
whoa.
I think it is Bemidji, 'cause if you go down their main street, yeah, it's just sign after sign.
Yeah, like the
On the
buildings are
road.
high, close up on the roadway and yeah, you got like the sign coming up here and then you got one in the building and yeah, it's just, it's.
And again, it wouldn't
too
hurt my
much.
feelings to look at 2 sign areas. I think, doesn't Duluth have a separate sign stuff for like the canal and things like that?
Yeah, they have different.
Right?
things, Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, you wouldn't have to shoehorn it into one policy. Yeah. Just something to think about.
So basing signage off zonage.
Could be. I mean, you could look at that.
The,
I understand wanting to keep it simple too. I get
yep,
that.
and my only. I'm gonna play the advocate the other way is if you go that route, one of the zone is going to be more restrictive. More than likely the marketplace. If you start breaking up into individual zoning districts.
Because of the density of the buildings.
Just basically, we have a different supposed theme, you know, in the marketplace.
But I would tell you that there's
That's
way
how
more
empty
buildings
it
in the
is.
marketplace that don't have.
I know, we can talk
Front
about
on a
that.
main street.
Yep. So.
Yeah.
So it's basically, it's multi-tenant, single level buildings. It's a question of what the allotment is per side.
Mhm.
Then it's multiple story, multi-tenant buildings. How do we handle that? Is it per floor? You get X number of square feet per what is called a sign band. And then do we translate that around all 4 corners of the building?
Yeah, it would
For all
depend on the
4 sides.
orientation of that building.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just, yeah.
Yeah. And again, I'm not in favor of doing it like on the 2nd or 3rd or 4th or 5th floors. I have no
Mhm.
problem on the the main level and the very top, if there was a primary tenant or a naming rights of the building, for example, because we modeled up that 3-story building 4 or 5 different ways, and that was the best looking one to me.
That, and then that gets more into what you're saying, Dante, is it still has the landlord control.
Mhm.
Is that the city has put at least a number on it. And it's up to the owner, developer, et cetera. We don't have to put that much.
Yeah.
We don't like that look.
Yeah, Commissioner Clark indicated, maybe there's some just parameters. And then we give both the city, the parameters and the landlord the ability. I mean, part of me kind of says, hey, landlord, if you made your building ugly, I'm sorry, they're gonna go rent over there. So,
Right.
right? And so, but we don't want to do that as a city necessarily either. But yeah, it's a tough issue to find where the objective parameters are and where the subjectiveness is allowed.
And like I said, I think for the most part, it's worked pretty well, but there's always been these outliers. And just with potential development here in the future and the way development is going, those outliers are going to become more the norm. And let's try to at least help staff, because we know how to give, because our job is to give guidance to people who approach us with stuff. Hey, I'm going to go take one thing, because I've already understand that on a multi-tenant single story, you cannot combine your square footage.
I would say not.
So I'm gonna take
I
that
would
one step
suggest-
further on multi-story sign bands, same principle. That let's say you have 3 bands of 1 square feet each, 300 square feet. Can they do one massive 300 square foot sign, or they only choose to, or it's basically, I'm putting a sign band at the bottom and at the top, like Joe was talking about. So you get that band, you get that floor. You can't add floor 2 to floor 3.
Right. I mean, I would suggest that that's equal for the tenants as well. If you get so much per band size for each floor or wherever. Again, as owners, you're gonna limit that, but it will allow for them to say, yeah, you could put it on the 3rd floor. If you want to spend the money up there, go for it. I don't know who's going to see it, but yeah, you can do that.
Oh, but the 3rd floor in some buildings would be the best view. For the
Absolutely.
sign.
So I think it really needs to be that direction.
So what would a motion look like today?
Come on, Corey, let's hear it.
Here, my,
I think all you have to make the motion is, I think staff needs to look a little bit further based on our discussion this evening.
is that enough guidance? and
I think that's what I
guidance?
said. I'm trusting that this is being tape recorded this evening. Last meeting wasn't. And that at least this will all be in the minutes. And so
Sure.
we can go through it again to get the finer points.
Perfect.
But at least the takeaways I'm hearing, single story, multi-tenant. We got to look at that. We're gonna look at 4 sides. Then it's multiple story, multi-tenant buildings. How do we want to address that? Each floor gets a band, X number of square feet. Does that translate onto all 4 sides or what? At the end of the day, it's what kind of boils down to.
Right. All questions I've asked in the last 3 years.
Yep.
And there won't be a variance process in this? No. Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, I make a motion that the city staff does a deep dive into the items we have discussed and have been recorded over the last hour.
Thank you for that. Can we get a second?
Thomas only second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Not hearing any. 5A passes forward for the city to take a little harder look at it. Number 6, continuing business.
Actually, so Dante, were you the second?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Continuing business, no, but I would like to have a discussion under new business about the date for the February meeting.
Okay,
I'm
number
out of town that 3rd week. So we have multiple options. We can, if you just want to stick with Tuesdays, we could do the 14th or the 18th. That still gives us enough time to notice.
Wait a minute, 14th or when?
Or I'm sorry, I didn't say the 18th, the 28th. The 14th will still give us a chance to notice. I said, expecting one thing on the agenda and this potential continuation. Honestly, if it's the 14th, we probably won't have enough time to do a deep dive. The 28th might give staff a little bit more time for at least the sign ordinance. But it's more or less what the availability is here as the board.
Well, does the sign ordinance need to come back in February or can it come back in March?
It could come back in March.
I guess I would vote for Wednesday, the 15th.
Wednesday or
Wednesday is February 15th.
That would work for me.
Works for me.
I'm out of town basically the rest of the month after that. But I don't need to be here. Corey is more than capable of running the meeting.
The 15th?
The 15th would work for me.
Would
I'm
work.
gone after on the 17th through basically the rest of the month.
15th would work for me.
me as well.
Okay, we'll say the 15th at 7 PM.
Yep, that's fine. That doesn't interfere with Valentine's Day for anybody. And
And I don't believe as.
you said you've
city,
got
we
something
have any
coming
other
up.
Meetings. I'm sorry?
You said you've got something coming up and then if the
Yeah.
sign ordinance makes it great, if it doesn't, March is fine.
Sure, okay. Okay, so we'll go on February 15th at 7 PM.
Yep, that sounds
Okay.
good.
I'll just double check that with other city meetings, but at this point, let's go with that.
I think we would get primary for that.
I got booted at a meeting earlier today, so.
Did you?
Yeah.
Number 8, any communications?
No.
Number 9, commission member reports. Myself, nothing. Mr. Colquist,
No report.
Valerie Roulette, Samuel Clark,
No report.
Beth Wenzloff,
No report.
Dante Tomasoni.
No report.
Thank you for that. Can we get a motion to adjourn, please?
Sam Clark with motion to adjourn.
Thank you for that. Can I get a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll close the meeting at 8:19 PM.